Welcome, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm so glad that you could join us. Welcome to Voices of Humanity at prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media. I am your host. I feel privileged and blessed to be your host. I am your host, Sandra McKechnie. I almost forgot my name. Anyhow, it's great to be here. We have an amazing guest for you today, and we're gonna have a wonderful, relaxing conversation that is gonna add such content, and I believe healing is a word to your life. And the Voices of Community is about that. It's about hearing your voice, bringing people on the show. This is our first show, bringing people on the show that is going to really speak from their heart, have candid conversations, and you are going to identify with those people. I know it. You know, when sometimes you're watching a YouTube video or you're watching a podcast or you read a book and you feel like, oh, they've said or I've read, that's how I feel, and they've echoed my voice, and that's what the Voices of Humanity is about. So we're going to have a lot of different diverse guests on the show, and the umbrella, what's driving Voices of Humanity is double consciousness. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, then I'm going to bring our wonderful guests. I run webinars called Double Consciousness, and they kind of look like cultural sensitivity and awareness trainings. Double consciousness is a concept put forward by W.E.B. Du Bois, social reformer. He's the NAACP, a National Association of Advancement of Colored People. He was, let's say, the calendar boy of the NAACP for well over 20 years. And he coined and honed the term double consciousness. It was around before him, but he actually coined and honed it. Psychiatrists, psychologists used it. And what it means is two streams of thought, two social identities. And it has everything to do with the people that came across the sub-Saharan trade, transatlantic slave trade, apartheid, colonization, imperialism, and were affected for hundreds of years with two streams of thought, two social identities, people that were assimilated upon trauma that show up a certain way in the 21st century. So that's what's driving Voices of Humanity and the many intersections that we're going to cover. Okay. And I'm so glad to be here with you. And please, we're going to send this out all over the place. And I would love you to like, share, comment. If you're watching it live with us, I'm so glad that you're here. And if you're going to hear it later, it's going to be wonderful because you are going to actually want to send us a comment. And you can get in touch with me at Double Consciousness, two B's, doubleconsciousness@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us. And welcome, a big welcome to our guest, Wendy McGean. She said she was a little nervous. Oh, she's done this before. And you're going to see her beautiful face, and she's got a lot to share. And she's a coach as well. We have a lot in common. We actually schooled at the same learning institution. It was a different course for you, right? You did the business course, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and I did the certified life coach. So we've gone through that program. She went to one of my events. I attended one of hers, and I'm just really thrilled. I consider her a colleague, and she has a beautiful heart. And I'd like to share. She's going to share her something about her vanilla world. We'll get to that. I know now you're interested, right? She's going to share about her vanilla world and what that looks like. Okay, so let me just read a little bio so you get a sense of who she is, and then she's going to add to that. Wendy McGean. Wendy McGean is active as a certified personal and business performance coach, working effectively with people has been a lifelong passion for Wendy that began with Dale Carnegie training soon after starting her career. A Bachelor of Commerce graduate, she previously spent 30 years in corporate IT. After choosing early retirement in 2019, Wendy decided to completely change directions and set off on a solo motorcycle tour across Canada. Very interesting. As a result, Wendy just published her first book, Round Trip: How I Found Myself on Three Wheels, dealing with the dramatic shifts in her life. The complimentary podcast, and she's got her information. It has attracted listeners from over 30 countries. Wendy's also an accomplished artist, creating visual arts to open up her world. Now, we're going to ask you, Wendy, to tell us a little bit about yourself, and so that just people get an idea of who Wendy McGean is.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me. It's a thrill to sit here and chat with you today, Sandra. I just love your
Me too.
energy. I grew up in northern Cape Breton, early 60s. I was born and spent my whole life there. You mentioned earlier about my vanilla world, and that's kind of what it was like. We were not a lot of people of color. There was certainly indigenous people in that area, but I was kind of in my own little bubble. I was looking just at people that looked like me and interacting with people that looked like me. Went to university and then moved on to Montreal when I was in my early 20s, and I've been here ever since.
Mm.
Um, as you mentioned, I have made a lot of changes in my world in the last couple of years, and one of the big ones for me was stepping outside of my bubble to look around to see what else is out there in that big wide world, and learning about other people and other places, and trying not to be so vanilla.
Mm. Okay. I love when you said you wrote me a little write up as to where you would like this to go. And one of the things that I think was really wonderful for me, and I think our viewers are going to feel the same way, is that you wanted to approach this conversation with curiosity and integrity, and with the intention to invite others to question their knowledge and beliefs. Could you attach that to what that looked like for you when you actually came in to Double Consciousness Fundamentals? That's the one of our trainings, Double Consciousness Fundamentals. What did that do for you? What happened initially?
Absolutely. After spending 30 years in IT, and again, I was always in my bubble. And a couple of things, there was probably three events, if you will, that happened in the last few years that kind of set me on a path of curiosity and just opening up my mind. The first was a course that I took with Well Systems around 2017, and one of the concepts that they talked about was the concept of generational trauma, and
Mm,
how any human who was had some sort of trauma generations back in their life, it gets carried forward at a cellular level. Read about Dr. Bruce Lipton, for instance, and there's all sorts of studies out there that talk about how this gets carried on.
yes.
And I was a little curious about that, but at the time just kind of put it in the background and never thought much about it. And then in 2019, I really did change my life completely. I decided to take early retirement. I had actually left my marriage the previous year, and was really redefining who I was, and was trying to figure out where I fit in the world. So I hopped on my motorcycle, and I did a solo coast to coast across Canada. I did it in two parts, but I went from Cape Spear, Newfoundland, right to Tofino and back. And as I was traveling, I was constantly aware of the fact that I was going through areas that where I was seeing things that didn't quite make sense. Growing up in Nova Scotia, I was well aware of the Mi'kmaq indigenous people, for instance.
Hmm.
And I was taking secondary roads and not driving the Trans-Canada, so off the beaten path. And as I drove from Quebec into New Brunswick, I realized that there was a Mi'kmaq community, Listugush, there. And I thought, how did I miss that? How did I not know that they were that far west? Just not knowing facts and details, and you know, not being curious when I was younger to try to learn more, and not really liking history either, quite frankly, when I
Right,
was growing
right.
up. It was
I hear
boring,
you.
boring, right? And then, as I continued my travels, I went to see the Samus teepee outside of Medicine Hat in Alberta, and was driving through BC, and all again off the beaten path, going through all of these reservations
How
and
did you
areas.
do that on your own?
You know what?
That's incredible. And you
It
were
was
nervous. That's a lot of
uh,
courage to go across Canada.
but that trip did not at all intimidate me. It was, I think when opportunities present themselves, when we're ready for them, there's no fear. Like, I never feared for my safety.
Mhm.
I believe that Canada is essentially a safe country. And the year before, I kind of toyed with the idea of doing it. I actually thought that I was going to get out, I was going to lose my job from redundancy or whatever. But I wasn't that comfortable on the motorcycle yet. By the time it came around that I finally retired, I thought, you know what, I've got this. And I wanted to see Canada. I inherited a love of this country probably from my dad more than anybody else. And even when we were kids, we would drive around the Cabot Trail, and he would point out who lived where. And it was a trip that I think he would have loved to have made. So in some ways, it was an homage to him. And it was
Mm.
really a chance for me to completely get outside my comfort zone, completely do something different, and do something just for me. I was 55 years old, and I was trying to figure out what was next in my life. And that was just kind of like a natural adventure. And honestly, it was life-changing. It really was. And a big part of the reason was because it opened up my mind even further and made me realize that people live in all sorts of different ways. There's all sorts of different normals, and there's all sorts of different realities. And it was fascinating to uncover and speak to people, just random strangers, and learn about people. Because again, I was so busy in corporate, like knocking things off a list. I was the queen of to-do lists.
Yeah.
And you get so busy that it kind of squelches that curiosity. And now I had this time in front of me where I could just be and do, whatever I wanted to within reason, kind of thing, in the next little while. So it really opened up my mind to realize that I didn't know Canada at all. I didn't know the makeup of our people. And I'd spent very little time getting curious about people's backgrounds. Like, certainly in the course of my job, I'd worked with people with color, and I never considered myself a prejudiced person, but I never got curious about other people. And then, so then when I get into coaching, I realized that what most people want is to be listened to. That whole concept of I see you, I hear you, you matter. So to sit down and have a conversation where you're listening to the other person, my typical way of approaching the world is to learn about stuff and to inform. Coaching kind of turned that on its head, and I started to listen more and realize like everybody has such beautiful gifts to offer the entire world. And when we let them shine, then I can't imagine how much better a world we could have if we just let people be who they are.
You wrote that on your outline, and I really appreciated it. And I also remembered your humility when you came into my training. The content was fierce, eh, Wendy? I mean,
it was. And I was nervous.
I know. Go ahead. You were nervous.
I was nervous because I grew up in such a vanilla world, and I never asked those tough questions before, and I didn't know that much. I was really afraid that I was going to ask a question that might offend. Like, am I using the wrong term? Can I say this? Like, is people of color the right way to say it? Like, because I just didn't know, because I kind of avoided that whole, anything that was confrontational or anything that would possibly offend someone else. I ran in the other direction or just kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to talk about that stuff. I didn't want to
identify. And let me tell you, Wendy, sometimes I don't even know what I'm supposed to say. Listen, I was doing one of my webinars and I said black, and these are bywords, but for all intents and purposes, please excuse us in advance. So I was saying black, white, indigenous, Latinx, and I was just referring to the people that have come through, for our listeners that have come through the trainings. And so I said the word black, and a gentleman came up and corrected me, and I understood where he was coming from, because when you look at the word black in the dictionary, it's not very complimentary. So the black sheep, it's yes. So it's got a lot of, it identifies us in a derogatory, diminutive way as a people. Now, when you came to Double Consciousness, what was impactful for you?
Just the fact that it was so ingrained that people really lived with two different identities, essentially. Like, I never really thought about it in those terms before, that there was a way for like a person of color to act within their own community where they could be completely themselves. And then they were putting on another, almost a mask, if you will, to live in and among everybody else. That one struck me really hard, because I never thought about it before. I never stopped to consider what other people's reality would be.
Yes. And do you remember why that two streams of thought exist? Two social identities? I'm doing a peace sign. I want them to see it.
I do. I remember you talking about like a slave owners, for instance. And that story really sticks in my head about how they would they essentially had slaves, again, and would they might say to the one guy who seemed to have leadership qualities, you represent me. You do whatever you have to do here. You manage them, you discipline them. If you have to, you kill them, which blows my mind. And so you're me. But then on the other hand, you will never be me.
Yes. I'm
a person of privilege. You are owned by me. I am your owner. So and I think a lot of people may go through life that way for various reasons.
Yes.
But to think that a whole segment of our population have inherited that consciousness
Yes.
is amazing to me. It's sad on so many levels that people felt they had to go through their lives like that.
And one thing we did in our trainings was, it's incredible. Even at this moment, I'm going to just give honor to our indigenous brothers and sisters and the land that we're on, because we're very connected historically with the indigenous, and the face of the indigenous has changed like ours is. We have a lot of different shades, but the shade of the indigenous was very different many years ago. But we connect with them a lot, though I focus in double consciousness on the people that maybe went through apartheid, colonization, imperialism, etc., and that were we talk a lot about intergenerational trauma, and these people that have two streams of thought and two social identities. And we talk a lot about what the faces of super predators actually look like. The term super predator came in 95 and was really pushed forward by Mrs. Clinton a lot, and a number of other politicians and people in governmental positions, talking about super predators. And their faces were black, and their faces were Latinx, and these were the faces. But you got to join the training, everybody, to find out what the real faces of super predators look like. And Wendy, you were in my training when I presented for the school. You were in the first part of this training. And so for me, as a person, a white, excuse the byword, I know she's a little pink, maybe beige, but we know what we're referring to.
I'd like to say I have two tones, either fish belly white and lobster red. That's about it.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah, I have a couple of sister girls that fit there too. But I just wanted to know, in terms of, you had said that you were in this vanilla world. And honestly, I can identify in some ways in terms of, there's other groups, like a friend of mine is from Sri Lanka. And I just assumed everybody was India. Everybody's from India that, has that beautiful face, that brown face. And just there's certain things that we weren't taught in school. So one of the things we did in Double Consciousness was say, it's not my fault, but I choose to do something about it. And when we talk about this, I want our viewers to get an understanding of what we really try to do in Double Consciousness. When I talk about people that came across the sub-Saharan trade and the transatlantic slave trade, etc., apartheid and so on, we're talking about hundreds of years of disconnect that we have. So we go through a time warp, 21st century, say 20, 19, 18, 17, and say we're in the cusp of slavery. We get information. What was it that we have disconnected from? So we get that information, we come right back 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and we have the answers, we get the reasons in Double Consciousness, and we forge forward with the hope. And what we tout is this: it's not my fault, but I can do something about it. It's not my fault, but I can do something about it. That's why Voices of Humanity, we want to bring on people like Wendy. We want to bring on our indigenous brothers and sisters. We want the voices of humanity to be heard on this show. So could you tell me, when we talked about it's not your fault, but you can do something about it, what does that look like for you?
Well, for me, it made me realize that it's okay to ask questions. And if I'm not sure about something, then state it plainly. I'm not sure if this is the right term. Can you explain to me? And because that helps me to educate myself. And then when I have conversations with other people, then I know more. When I know more, I can do better, right?
Love it.
And by knowing the history, for me, Sandra, it comes down to a question of respect with all people.
Yes, absolutely.
Regardless of background, where you're from, what you do, I am no better than anyone else. And the best that I can do is treat other people with respect and with a curiosity as I engage in conversation.
Yes.
And to approach it with integrity, right? With the best possible intentions, and let people know that maybe they're missing some information, that maybe there's something that they're not aware of that might change their perspective a little bit. I think I try to go through life now with a coach approach, right? Where I'm curious and I want to know what's going on for the other person. I think I used to go through life again with the intention of informing. And I've realized in the last couple of years that there's so much I don't know about so many different things.
I really do.
Right? But because of that, it allows me to say, okay, I've got nothing to lose here. What can I learn? What can I learn, and what can I take forward to my next conversation so that we all get a little bit better at this? And
Mm.
and there's so much that's happened in the past, and I think that's a common thought. Like, well, I wasn't there. I didn't do anything about that. I can't fix that. No, I can't go back like 30 years. I can't go back 100 years. I can't. But what I can do is go forward, treating everybody equally.
Absolutely. And on that note, one of the most beautiful things I found was when I collided with, there was two people in my life, W.E.B. Du Bois, of course, and a lady by the name of Dr. Joy DeGruy. She's an amazing woman out here doing her work. And I met those two people and I collided and I wept for days, Wendy. I wept because the difference between, especially the indigenous and people of color, those that came across the trade, sub-Saharan, and so on, is the fact that they do have two streams of thought, two social identities. Some may call it code switching, but this is deeper. Code switching is example. It's like, I used to hang around with an Italian friend in school, and initially, it seemingly code switching meant she's speaking to her parents in Italian, and then she turns back to me in English, speaks to mom again in Italian, and then turns back and speaks to me in English, and it's seamless. But then it morphed into code switching meant that I'm going to make light of this. Times are rough. That you say you show up white by day, you present white by day, and then you present black by night. Okay, so in terms of going along to get along, because when you mentioned the example, when we have this two streams of thought and two social identities, is a dissonance, and it's inconsistent and it's difficult. And for our people, it kind of looks like this. And I will give this example as we go on in different shows. But this was, Wendy, you alluded to this, is that the slave master back in the day, say, this is an example, okay? So say he calls, it's like this, he calls the slave and he says, come here, come here. He's looking through a lens. The slave master's looking through a lens and he's looking at a video of himself. And he calls the slave and says, come, look through this lens. And the slave grabs the lens and looks through and he said, what do you see? Slave master says, I see you, massa. And he says, yeah, you see me, you see what I'm doing, right? Yeah. So he said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to look like me. I want you to talk like me. I want you to take this whip and beat the slaves to death. If you need to, beat them to death, just like me. You can break bread with me if I so choose to let you do that. But at the end of the day, remember, you are not me. Okay. So I always think, as much as we want to be collaborate with all people, the indigenous blacks on par have been dehumanized for hundreds of years. And so it's the way, of course, these people were treated. And I recognize when people come into the 21st century, we all just want to forget about it. But Double Consciousness, those webinars close that disconnect. And how did that feel for you to even hear that?
It's very uncomfortable. It's a tough thing to listen to. Again, especially somebody like me who's always kind of avoided those tough conversations. And I think that we have to bring this stuff to the surface. That's the only way that we can start to realize what other people are going through and start to empathize and start to fix the whole fix going forward. I saw a number this morning. It's like, again, the parallel with indigenous populations. In Kamloops, we started with that number 215 earlier this summer, right? 215 unmarked graves that were discovered.
Yes.
I think the count is now up. I saw something this morning, 7,310.
Overwhelming.
And it is. And I've heard people say, what we knew about some of those in some of those areas. Okay, that's fine, but they still need to be included in the count. We still need to make sure that we understand how big a problem that was. What's that? I don't even remember who said it. Those who refuse to learn history are destined to repeat it.
It's interesting because it's exactly how it works. Yeah. And that's why we really want people to close that disconnect. All people, the indigenous as well. I was speaking to a friend this morning and she was saying, my gosh, she was going over, funny you mentioned it, how much has happened to our indigenous brothers and sisters. And that sometimes we may need to pause just to acknowledge that in the privacy of our own hearts, And as a coach now, because you remembered my presentation, I put forward that coaches without judgment, because we're taught, receiving and offering our skills and so on without judgment, and people have come before us. Now, and one of the things that I was sharing in when I presented was that we can actually acknowledge, especially the indigenous and our blacks or brown people, people of color, without even saying words.
Mhm.
How do you feel about that?
I think that, well, yeah, absolutely. Like we exchange energy all the time, right?
Hmm.
When we
Hmm.
walk into a room, we can be welcoming and opening, or we can be fearful and, shrinking, not sure what to say. Again, it's curiosity, integrity, and respect for the other person. Like that doesn't need words. We can
Right.
feel that. We can feel it in someone else when we're talking to them, if they're truly listening to us or not, if they're really present for us. And that's where it all starts. Like so many changes start person to person, right? This is not the kind of stuff that you can legislate.
Mm,
I think we're
good
seeing in
point.
our world that as soon as we
Yeah.
start to force people to do things, then we get other people with their back up saying, I'm not doing that. That doesn't make any
Yes.
sense to me.
Absolutely. Yes. The
Understand,
acts aren't facts. The
yeah,
policies.
understanding, yeah. Like, politicians don't fix this stuff. Like we need to be open and transparent. I like that word that you used earlier, like, and have those conversations, because as we learn, we grow, and then we spread those seeds when we're talking to
Mm.
people.
Yes, and even politically, like we have enough of these symbolic achievements. We have the Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard, Rosa Parks Boulevard. We have a lot of symbols, and that's wonderful. But you're right, people like you and I, and so many other people that are going to be on the show, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our viewers on this because it's a huge deal. It is huge, and I'm glad that you stepped out of your vanilla world to participate in double consciousness, right?
Oh, it's a
To
pleasure.
really participate. So when you hold space, when you think of holding space as a coach, I know it's affected me tremendously. When you think of holding space for different people, um, how would you go about what areas how do you think you will acknowledge them if someone comes in, a black person, you know, how would you go about that in your thought world, in your consciousness? How would you go about that?
Well, in fact, one of my current clients is a man of color, and it's just, for me, it's approaching everybody the same way, open, with integrity, and invite them to share their story. And to me, it's as simple as that. I mean, that's not really, that can be the easiest thing in the world, or it can be the most difficult thing in the world. We truly have to just let go of our own preconceived notions
Mhm,
and
mhm,
anything that we
mhm.
think that we know, and just be present for that other person.
Now I challenge that a little bit, Wendy,
Okay.
because I think it's important to
Mhm.
acknowledge and treat people the same way.
Mhm.
However, when it's almost like a friend of mine said, if there's houses that are on fire and you can see they're on fire, you don't send fire engines to the ones that are not on fire. So I hear
Yes.
what you're saying, but I
Okay.
also I really understand that. Uh, for me, giving if an indigenous person comes into my, I'm not going to do a land acknowledgement, but I make them, maybe they may feel awkward about that.
Okay.
But in my consciousness, I'm certainly going to acknowledge, even if I do it with myself,
Okay.
I'm going to acknowledge that, yes, even if I say it silently in myself, they have been through something. I acknowledge them. I acknowledge that. And because of their history, doesn't mean I need to give them something special, give them a discount, but maybe, if you're led to do that. But I'm going to acknowledge what they have gone through. And I kind of submit that is what changes that spirit, that energy
Okay.
in the room. I don't know how you feel that lands with you.
Actually, that's lovely. I never thought about it in those terms
Mhm.
before. Um, and I don't know that I consciously approach my conversations that way. Because again, for me, it's truly being unbiased and open. But
Yes.
I like that we actually make an intention to consider what they have been through. And I think that's nonverbal. Like I can see that playing into the energy of the conversation.
For sure. I
Yeah,
think so.
I think you're right.
when you think about unintentional, this concept of implicit bias, implicit racial bias,
Mhm.
unintentional, unconscious bias with certain groups. I mean, I had to look at myself. I'm thinking that you know that India just encompasses all brown people, so that there's no differentiation between.
Mhm.
And talk to some people and get a little education,
Yeah.
in myself. It's not only about issues of blackness, right? You've got Muslims, you've got Latinx, we've got the whole world out here, nations of people.
Mhm.
Um, so when you think of implicit bias in your life, and you tap into your conscious awareness, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes, people are just going to tap in. So the four states of competency, people are just going to tap into the fact that, wait, I'm aware that I don't know some stuff. So
Yeah.
you tap into your conscious unawareness. And viewers, that is a magnificent place to be, because you're saying, you know what? I'm aware that I am unaware. This is
Yeah.
perfect, because then you can start doing something. You might want to take my training or another training. There's some amazing ones out here.
Mhm.
So you may want to tap into that. And that's a beginning. So what I'm asking, Wendy, is, when you think of implicit bias, unconscious bias in your life,
Yes.
have you been able to tap into what that looked like or looks like? Because it's a continual struggle.
I think when I can think about when I was younger, kind of thing, and again, growing up in that vanilla world where I would have heard racial slurs and just kind of ignored it
Hmm.
with the idea that if I ignored it, it'll just go away. I wouldn't have challenged that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Today, I'm more likely to challenge that and say, there's something wrong with the thinking there, or and at least again, it's an opportunity to educate, right? And when I look at younger people today, I had a discussion with a lady. She was in a group call that I was in a couple of weeks ago, and she made a comment about, she's in her 20s. She said, "I love my generation because we're challenging all of those biases, and we're turning them all on their head." And certainly, when I look at my own 20-something daughters, I see an openness that I could not have dreamed of when I was younger.
Wow.
So,
Yes. Yes.
so again, I was in a vanilla world and didn't challenge stuff. They will challenge you on it. They will not let something slide. And
Yes.
I
I think
think
that's great.
and I think that's amazing. I mean, we have to be careful not to be too confrontational. We want to
Yes.
educate. We don't want to
Yes.
we don't want to shut people down, because when we
Yes.
try to, if we're too confrontational with people, then
Mm.
we say, well, they're wrong, and then they just walk away and nothing's been learned. But they will bring it to your attention. They'll hold you accountable, which is pretty amazing.
I think that's amazing. Our young people are making a tremendous difference. We mentioned, because, yeah, definitely, they're more aware of a lot of things, especially when it comes to this topic as well. Now, we mentioned a gentleman, Dr. David R. Williams. I don't know if you remember him. Now, he was a man out of Harvard, and he said that racism makes people sick. And he had these stats that were incredible. Racism makes people sick. Because of the multi-generational faceted trauma, intergenerational, transgenerational, that's being passed on, the way the slave master called and said, hey, look through the lens. You're nothing. You see me, be like me, but you're nothing. This conflict, this dissonance, right? This inconsistency. And it's not a split personality, my viewers. It's different. It's how we have been assimilated upon trauma to present ourselves. So, for example, what was making me sick before I woke up about 5 years ago, woke, as we say, is that I was assimilated through generations to identify as white. So my black sister girls would say, "You're so white," and of course my white sister girls would be like, "Oh, come on, leave her alone," kind of thing. But she's who she is, and that's great. But because the black sister girls, we're from the same, connected on the same, we understood some stuff, but we didn't understand some stuff. Right now, the consciousness is different than
Right.
just doing things every day that you've been taught. But when I woke up, it was this idea that, oh my gosh, I didn't know who I was. I didn't understand that I was identifying white. And do we have something against white people? White's in my family. My father's mixed race. My grandfather's Scottish. So
Okay.
the whole thing here is we're all mixed up anyway. So it's the idea that as a woman walking down the street, people see my locks. They
Mhm.
they don't. I don't have a T-shirt on my, the top on my a T-shirt on saying "Hey" with my grandfather's picture on it.
Right.
And they wouldn't care. They just see a woman of color coming.
Right.
I have a mixed race nephew who's mixed with Portuguese. People see color coming still, even
Okay.
though he's fair, right? But and he gets treated a certain way outside. He really does, right? By the law, people that, are casing him, different kind of things. So it's a lot of this, of this stuff ends up making us sick. When you go into a store and someone's casing you because they think that me, of all people, it happened to, people think that you are going to, I don't know, rob the joint or steal something. It's something that is constantly walking with you, and you have this sort of hypervigilance, that people aren't aware of. And that's part of, I hope you go on to take the advanced version. Double
Yeah.
consciousness advanced, because it just shows people it's not about fault. It really is about education. You alluded to that. It really is
Yeah.
about knowing. And I want to know more about the indigenous, so I don't make, like you were so sensitive when you spoke earlier. I want to know what to say. I want to know
Yeah.
how to approach them, and what are the things that I should say. I took an all-day training, but it wasn't enough. I need to go back and do all the,
Okay.
that's great. That was a start, but I really need to know, because I have such a passion for them, and I want to approach them correctly, the same way I want people to approach us,
Yes.
people of color, right? And I think that is what makes you sick. It's the hypervigilance, always wondering,
Yeah.
are they thinking I'm going to steal, or that sort of thing.
That's interesting. It's well, what is sickness but dis-ease? When you're
Yeah,
always on alert and you're
right.
always holding something that where you're not in flow, you're not comfortable. Absolutely, that causes disease.
Yeah, I love what you said. You're not in flow.
Yeah.
You mentioned a lady, and I wanted to go into that brought you. You had three areas that really brought you into, you had a lot of stuff in your background about this, and about what we're doing now and double consciousness and so on. But there was three things that you said brought you into my area, my arena,
Yes.
our consciousness.
Mhm. So are you thinking about the well systems?
Yes, yes.
Louise, yeah,
What is that about?
Louise LeBrun. She's actually has a whole body of knowledge, and it's all based on the premise that we don't know what we don't know.
Totally.
The structure of reality is that, like, let's say that this circle represents all the knowledge in the world.
Yes,
If we are honest with ourselves, the
yes.
amount that we actually know is this tiny little slice. That's what I know. Because think about it.
Mm.
I grew up in Cape Breton. I don't know what it's like to live in Fiji. I don't know what it's like to live in Australia. That's not my reality. So again, if this is the entire body of knowledge in the world, then there's another little slice about stuff that I don't know. I don't know. I know I don't know, rather. So I know that I don't know what it's like to live in Australia. But then so we can take that little slice out. The rest of that's stuff I don't know. I don't know. I don't know anything about astrophysics. I don't know
Yes,
anything about
yes,
cellular
yeah.
biology. Like, and that's very humbling. And I think accepting that premise kind of opens us up to think, well, maybe there's something that I have to learn here.
Oh, so true.
And so that's how I approach my life now. Like, I just love that body of knowledge where we're talking about, like, how it doesn't speak about certain segments of our population, but it talks about how in general
Hmm.
we have an internal knowing. The body never lies. I know when I'm in flow, or something makes sense to me or is a truth to me.
Yes, yes.
And but I when I went to work and I started to, I was very good at my career. I was very lucky. I met some amazing people. I worked with some great people, but I wasn't doing something that was really meaningful to me.
Yeah.
So when you're always fighting against yourself, which is exactly what you're describing in double consciousness,
Yes, yes, yes.
people not being able to be who they are.
Mm. And people come through the training, and people are weeping. We had one lady drop to the ground when we used to do this live. It was I was triggered. I was traumatized. But there's a beautiful part to this. It is bittersweet because the content is dense, but it's like when you look back and look at that, and you look in the mirror at that content that you were told, hey, shh, don't talk about it. Nobody wants to hear about it because this is what we've heard, just move on.
Yeah.
But there's a part of you that isn't allowed to fit with you.
Yeah.
And when I recognize that part, what they did to our people, what they did to our children, and the indigenous, I don't want to speak for them, but I can only imagine that they feel the same way when what they have done for so many years. So we don't apply blame. What we apply is something that is so productive. It's looking and closing that gap, that hundreds of years of disconnect. No, you didn't just show up here in the 21st century. You look like somebody, great, great, grand. You are somebody. Your DNA speaks that you have always been here, right? And it speaks to the fact that your epigenetic self, right? And when I recognized that I was somebody, when people say to me, "You look like your Auntie Joyce, you look like Auntie, Neat," or whatever, it dawned on me. It hit me when I collided with W. Du Bois and Dr. Joy DeGruy, and I learned that, oh my goodness, I was there. Part of me was there, and I'm here now, and there's something that I really want to offer people in that the healing happens when you close that disconnect, when you push two streams of thought, two social identities. Are we going to do this in my lifetime? Probably not, but we can push against this, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That whole gap is the people that were dehumanized and were taught to forget who you were. Doesn't matter. It does matter. That's our healing, right?
Absolutely.
And Steven Spielberg, when it comes to our Jewish brothers and sisters, not going to let you forget, and they had repair, and they had, and there's so much that, and I say to people in the trainings, do you remember the drove of clinicians that were there to help all those people that came across the transatlantic slave trade? And people are thinking, and I say, well, you wouldn't remember because it never happened. So many other groups got repair, but the indigenous, people of color, that is the biggest challenge. And why are we resilient? Because we're out here able to get degrees and do great things in spite of what we have gone through, right? But it's incumbent upon us to facilitate healing, I think. I don't know what you think about that, so we can go forward more.
Well, absolutely. And I think, again, for me, it comes down to education and learning. Like, I grew up in Nova Scotia, and I knew that we had, like, indigenous people. I knew that the Mcgee were there. Didn't know how far west they came. That the fact that they were in Quebec completely blew my mind. And one of the documentaries that you suggested that we watch in Double Consciousness was the one with Desmond Cole. I apologize, I just forget the name of it.
Of the skin we're in, I believe, something like that. Yeah.
So he went to Nova Scotia, right? And I know who Viola Desmond is, right? She refused to get, the movie theater in New Glasgow, right?
Yes,
That's an awesome story. I had heard of Africville, but not a lot of detail. But I had never heard of, I think, a place called Birchtown down near Shelburne, where there was actually slaves in the 1800s in Nova Scotia. That totally blew my mind. I thought, how did I not know that? So again, history is written by the victors, right? So there's, those little dirty details are left out.
Yes.
We don't focus on that. We don't want to talk about the tough stuff.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these things have to come to the surface so that we can realize that there was some horrible things done, and no, we can't go back 200 years and fix them.
Yes.
But we can acknowledge that it happened, and we can move forward more open and more, again, with integrity and treating people equally.
Wow. Now, how do we get to treat people equally?
I honestly, Sandra, I think it starts with individuals. I think it's not something you can legislate. We have to each take responsibility for how we move through the world and be accountable to ourselves. And when we see a wrong or we sense a wrong, question it. What can I do in that moment? Make a
because
choice.
Equality and equity can be different, right? So equality might say you get $100 and this one gets $100. That's equal, everybody across the board. But equity may say, hey, hello, the people that were economically castrated, socially castrated, psychologically castrated, let's look at equity as opposed to everybody gets the same.
And I think too, we need to ask, what does this person need right now?
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly
like I look at, as a mom raising two daughters when they were younger, I didn't treat them equally all the time.
Fabulous. That was in my mind about a friend.
there was times when one needed more than the other, and
Yes, it's so funny. A sister girl of mine, she was saying the same thing because she had a child. Her boy was really challenging. One of her boys. She's got 5 babies. They're big men and women now. One woman, but her boy was one of their children. Were really challenging as much as she loved him. And it was hard at times for another son to think, well, you're spending so much time, you're putting in so much effort, and blah blah blah. But it's no. This is where the need is. And so that's kind of a great example of equity, getting that person, that child that has the challenges to a place where they can be functional.
Yeah.
Right. This is really wonderful. I'm so glad we had this time together. Oh, I better do not sing
I
that.
love that you break into song.
Maybe I'll stick with voices of humanity. This is wonderful. What are your next steps for your life, Wendy?
Right now, I just actually earned my ACC with the ICF. Wrote my exam about 2 weeks ago, so that's done now. I'm kind of building my practice. Really working on getting my book out there. I'm really proud of it. My book is about the trip that I took across Canada. On 3 wheels, and I didn't set out to write a book, but when I came back, I was being pulled to share my story, and for whatever reason I did it. I self-published, so it's been out since about April, and it's starting to gain a little bit of traction now, which is awesome. I'm going to hold a copy of it up. I've got it right here.
Oh, please do.
And the cover is actually it's actually a map of Canada that wraps around the book, and it's one of my paintings. I actually traced my route.
Really?
You can see like going and coming. So one is red, and one is blue.
So where did you stay? Well, how did you sleep? What happened on the
a combination. I brought camping gear with me. Didn't camp as much as I wanted to. I did the eastern leg of the trip in June, July timeframe because I was taking early retirement, but I had to work until the end of September, and that would have been too late to do a coast to coast in Canada. You know what weather can be like, right? We can hit snow in September. So I did from Montreal to Cape Spear and back in the summertime. Camped one night, stayed with some friends a couple of times because I'm from the Maritimes, so I know that area, and stayed in a couple of B&Bs. Oh, but I kind of mapped that all out. I had 16 days. I had to be in a certain place at a certain time. On the western leg of the trip, it was the most freeing experience because I packed my stuff and I hit the road. No reservations, no idea where I was going to go. I just knew that I didn't want to repeat myself. So I kind of went north to Mont-Laurier and then west, and to come back a little bit further south on the way back. And I camped. On the way out, I stayed at some like motels kind of thing. I wasn't brave enough to go to Airbnb right away, going into somebody else's home as a woman traveling alone. So I was cognizant of the fact that I had to be somewhat careful.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really just a mixture of things. The weather, for the most part, cooperated, although I had to come back faster than I wanted to because there was snow predicted for Calgary, and it actually materialized. So it took me 3 weeks to go out, 2 weeks to come back. But it was just the most amazing, liberating experience. And like I said, the most fun was talking to random strangers, like,
Wow.
And I was in Moosomin, Saskatchewan. I started a conversation with someone, and we realized that we both knew the same person. Like just so many coincidences and things like that. It was really, I don't think I'd ever felt so free to do anything since I was a child. I get up in the morning. What am I going to do today? How far will I go? And just, again, trying not to repeat myself, just wandering around. And it was really life-altering.
What did that do for your mindset? Because it sounded like you were at a challenging, kind of a little bit of a crossroads at that time.
I had, and it was because I didn't know who I was, which is kind of what we're talking about, right?
Think about knowing who you are.
Yeah, and I really didn't know. Like I'd spent my life, and again, had made essentially great choices. I had a family that loved me, a mortgage that was paid off. I had a great job, but I felt like a square peg in a round hole, Sandra. That's what I felt like. And so when I came back, I had freed myself.
Yeah.
So I started, I turned to coaching. I knew I didn't want to go back into corporate. I was kind of done with that. I thought, okay, I need to retire, like a kind of a sunset career now. That's what brought me to coaching. And now my biggest thing is really focusing on rebuilding the relationships in my life. My husband and I are actually reconciling. because the relationship wasn't the problem. It was the way I was moving through the world.
Okay.
And
Okay.
but I
I
have
hear
to,
you.
yeah, but I have to
What a
admit,
show. That's great, because I felt the same way in mine. So
yeah, really, and
yeah.
but I still have to admit that the people that knew me and loved me, some of them don't know what to do with me now,
Oh my
because
goodness.
they really don't, and
We have a
it's,
lot in common.
you know what, and it's through no fault of theirs.
Yes.
I send
Yes.
them love and
Yes.
light. I invite them to engage, and if they don't want to or cannot right now for whatever reason, all right, I'm going to step back. That's hard to do sometimes with some of those really close relationships, when there's a fracture there, and so there has to be healing, there has to be repair. Again, something similar to what we're talking about. And maybe it'll never happen in my lifetime. Maybe I'll be
Right.
long gone when they'll think, oh, you know what, she wasn't so bad. I don't know. But all I know, what I know for
Wow.
certain now, is that I have to show up as myself.
Oh, I love hearing that. It does my heart good. I was moving through life not knowing who I was, and there's so many, I'm sure people are going to be identifying with Voices of Humanity on that one. On this is our first show, and we're so thrilled about it. That going through life and not knowing who you are is a big thing. And so when I said, I didn't joke, but I wasn't kidding when I said to you, my friends would say to me, "You're so white, you're so white." So what they're really trying to tell me is that you don't know who you are. Not, is there anything wrong with white? Absolutely not. But that's not who I am. So I needed to identify with who I was as a woman, as a Black woman. And I'm so empowered. Some of my friends say to me, I said, "Have I changed?" One of my sister girls, she said, white sister girl. She's white, blonde hair. She'll call herself pasty in a minute. But she said to me, I said to her, "Have I really changed?" And she said, "Total metamorphosis." But, they still put me in my place. They still know me, because it's not like that. Totally, right? But my life has been altered because of double consciousness.
That's
And
awesome.
the fact that I'm pushing back against, and I'm closing that disconnect as to who I am as a person.
Yeah.
To what happened back there, and that I'm embracing it. Oh my gosh, they did that to our babies. They did that to our men. They did that to our women. It did that to me. And just identifying with that and speaking about it. And when people come on double consciousness, like I said, it's an emotional time. We had white people that come in. We had one lady, I love her dearly, and she was very conscientious that she felt guilty. And I got it. I had to give her that. I had to acknowledge that, and we're about that acknowledgement. Those are her feelings. Part of me wanted to go, "Oh, stop that. It's not going to be very useful," but she genuinely felt that way. Felt like, all these white people, we were all a mess. We did something terrible. So I just reminded her, you weren't there, but let's move forward if we can. And we will look at your feelings for sure. But it's not your fault, but you can do something about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is that how you're feeling? And how do you feel going forward from today?
Well, it's again to keep to notice when I see something that makes me squirm a little bit, and actually act on it, as opposed to turning a blind eye and walking away. One of the things I do a podcast too that's kind of was set up to talk about the book. It's kind of a companion. It's called Round Trip with Wendy McGean. And on July 1st this year, with Confederation, our Canada Day, there was so much controversy. Did we celebrate? Did we not? I talked about our indigenous peoples and how we have to do better, and read the Truth and Reconciliation, recommendations, like learn what
I think that's great.
we can contribute. We can help to close that gap that you're talking about. We can help to make that healing possible.
Can we get that link? So when I send things out, that people can get that information? Is it a podcast?
It's a podcast.
Oh, we would love that.
It's I do like 5-6 minute segments once a week kind of thing. And I'm talking about the trip part of the time. Other times I'm talking about my own personal evolution. But that was a topic that really spoke to me back in July. And that was the last episode actually of my second season. I talked about our indigenous people. So it's, so I'm doing that. And I think, coaching is an amazing opportunity to help other people change or look at least, and examine their values, attitudes, and beliefs.
Yes, I wouldn't be without a coach. We're certified coaches, but I'll tell you, I wouldn't be without a coach. I need a coach. It's brought me into such awareness about myself. It's helped me with double consciousness tremendously, because I was doing that for a few years before I took the program at Canada Coaching Academy. And it has just really changed my life. I've had, and I always say to people, it's the one place, coaching. Yeah, we're putting a plug in for each other. Get in touch with us. We do some great coaching. We'll hold space with you ever so. We're following our code of ethics and our core competencies. And that's why I do like to do a formal program for that one. Not that other coaches aren't doing amazing things out there. We'll have to have you back, because we want to talk a bit about that, but we are running out of time. But this has been amazing. But yes, so coaching is an amazing part of my life. It's the one time, as I was saying, yes, it's the one time that it's actually just about you. And if you have a great coach that's just presenting and offering the right questions, you really do get this tremendous self-awareness.
I agree. That was one of the biggest surprises to me in taking coach training, because one of the things that we do is we're coaching with each other. So by being coached, I actually executed goals that I probably wouldn't have, certainly not in as timely a manner, had I not been coached. You realize how important it is just to have somebody listen to you and let you work through things and think things through.
Okay, so you're a business coach now. Can anybody approach you, or is it just a business coach, or if someone wanted to approach you for life coaching, or
I'll do the life coaching part as well. What I really look at, the people that I like to work with are people that are looking to make changes in their lives, particularly women that are in middle age, that are I want people to understand that sometimes big scary changes are possible, because change is difficult, and again, that my whole message is be in flow with yourself.
I love that.
Learn who you are and then go through the world.
Really liking me. What about you? I'm sorry. And we want you to like you. It's about you. And I'm
exactly
giving you something wonderful today, because this has been really good for me. Where can people reach you?
I've got a couple of email addresses. The one that is probably best to use is roundtrip@wendymcgean.ca.
Okay.
Kind of under construction, that website, but there's some contact points out there. So you can reach me that way. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I've got a coaching page and an artist page and a book page. I've got a couple of things going on there. But yeah, the email address is probably the best way to do it. Roundtrip@Wendy.
Where can they get the book? Can you show us again?
Yeah, and it's I self-published, so it's available through Amazon.
Okay.
And it actually is being distributed. I publish through Telwell out of British Columbia.
Okay.
But they actually, it's like in the US, you can order it through like Barnes and Noble and Target. You can get all sorts of places.
Great.
And it's available hardcover, softcover, and ebook. And I'm actually just starting to work on an Audible version.
Oh, wow.
Some people have asked me if that's possible. So as soon as I can find a quiet space and my dog's not snoring, I'll
I know. I was afraid about the cats scratching at the door today. I hope Guy's going to say it went okay. But this is great. And I will absolutely attach all of that information. So people, when we send it out, that you have access to Wendy, you want to get in touch with her, you want to coaching, etc. And you want to get her book, you want to find out more about her, and you're going to be able to do that too. Again, I am so glad we had this time together. I really want to go into that song. You know the one I mean?
Yes.
All in the Family. I don't want to get a shadow ban or flagged or anything like that. But this was really great for both of us.
I've loved this.
Positively. Am I right? Was it great?
Absolutely. This was wonderful. I was really nervous coming into this because I'm not used to being on camera, but it was lovely to talk.
You did great. You really did great. And I'm hoping that we can connect again and again.
Absolutely.
So this is Voices of Humanity at PR Connections Radio, the voice of new media. And I would love you to get in touch with me, Sandra McKechnie, doubleconsciousness.com, 2 B's, okay? 2 B's. And the email is Sandra McKechnie. What's the email? Yes, doubleconsciousness@gmail.com. Doubleconsciousness@gmail.com, 2 B's. Wendy, you were a wonderful guest.
Thank you so much for having me, Sandra. It's been a blast.
I had a lovely time with you. This is something that we are going to be doing the second Friday of every month, okay, at 1 p.m. EDT. That's Eastern Daylight Time. And I would love you to join us. Please share, like, comment when this is going to be out there. And I would love you to give us your comments. Get in touch with us. Voices of Humanity. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful, wonderful morning, afternoon, evening. Have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now. Voices of Humanity. We need to hear your voices. We need to hear